Let's be honest, political parties have a bit of an image problem, don't they? I mean, they're literally at the heart of our democracies, but for so many of us, they're just frustrating. We blame them for all the division, the gridlock, pretty much everything that feels wrong with politics. But what if they're more than just a necessary evil? Let's get into it. Yeah, does that sound familiar? It's a really powerful criticism, and it gets right to the heart of why a lot of us feel so disconnected. This idea that parties are just there to draw lines in the sand, to get us to pick a side instead of finding some common ground. And that brings us to this huge central puzzle we're going to unpack. If almost everyone has a complaint about political parties, why are they, well, everywhere? It's kind of wild when you think about it. Just 100 years ago, they were pretty rare. Now, you'd be hard-pressed to find a democracy that doesn't have them. There has to be a reason for that. So let's dive in. To really understand why parties are so essential, we've got to look past the angry headlines and the cable news debates. We need to look under the hood and figure out what they actually do. Because in a lot of ways, they really are the engine that makes a representative democracy run. So, what is a political party at its most basic level? Well, it's just a group of people who have some shared ideas about how a country should be run. They team up, they compete in elections, and the whole point is to try and turn those ideas into actual government policy. Simple as that. And if you break down any party, you'll find it's made up of three main groups. First, you've got the leaders. They're the ones steering the ship. Then you have the active members, the true believers, the volunteers on the ground, making calls and knocking on doors. And then there's the third group, the followers, which is most of us, the citizens who feel a connection to a party and back it up with their votes. And their job description, it is so much more than just win elections. Of course, they contest elections and they put forward different policies and programs, which gives us voters a choice. If they win, they're the ones who form and run the government, and they play a huge role in making laws. But, and this is super important, the parties that lose have a critical job too. They act as the opposition, holding the winners accountable. And through all of this, for all of us, they help shape public opinion and give us a way to access the government. So here's the real bottom line. Just try to imagine a democracy without them for a second. Every single candidate would be an independent, running on their own. Maybe a government could get formed, but who would be responsible for the big picture, for how the entire country is run? It would be total chaos. There'd be no one to hold accountable. Okay, but of course not all democracies do this the same way. The number of parties a country has can completely change how its politics work. So let's take a quick trip around the world and look at the main types of systems. First up, you have the one-party system. Think of China, where only the Communist Party is allowed to rule. When there's no real competition for power, it's just not considered a democratic option. Then there's the system a lot of us are familiar with, the two-party system. You see this in places like the USA and the UK, where power pretty much just swings back and forth between two major parties. Sure, other parties exist, but they have almost no shot at actually forming a government. And finally, there's the multi-party system, which you'll find in a place like India. Here, you have several parties all competing for power. And very often, when no single party wins a clear majority, they have to team up and form alliances or coalitions to govern. It brings a lot more different voices into government, but it can also sometimes lead to a bit of political instability. So this begs the question, which system is the best one? The two-party? Multi-party? Well, the answer is, there isn't one. A country's party system isn't something you can just pick from a menu. It grows out of its own unique history, its social makeup, and its election laws. You can't just copy and paste what works somewhere else and expect the same results. All right, so we've established that parties are necessary, but that absolutely does not mean they're working the way they should. And this brings us right back to that frustration we started with. So let's get into the 4 big challenges that explain why so many of us are so dissatisfied. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Data from South Asia shows this weird paradox. On the one hand, people's trust in political parties is super low. But at the exact same time, the number of people who say they're members of a party is high, and it's been going up. So we don't trust them, but we're joining them more than ever? What on earth is going on here? Well, a huge piece of the puzzle starts inside the parties themselves. Challenge number 1 is a massive lack of internal democracy. In so many parties, all the power is concentrated in the hands of just one or a few leaders right at the top. They rarely hold regular meetings or internal elections, which means ordinary members have basically no say in what the party does. And that first problem leads directly into challenge number 2,
dynastic succession. I mean, when leaders have total control and there are no open, transparent processes, it's really easy for them to just favor people they're close to, including their own family members. So top jobs end up being controlled by a single family, which isn't just unfair, it's terrible for democracy because you get people in powerful positions who have no real experience or popular support.
Challenge number 3 is the growing influence of money and, well, muscle power. Because parties are so focused on winning elections at any cost, they often take shortcuts. They'll nominate a candidate not because they're the best person for the job, but because they're rich and can pay for their own campaign. Or maybe even because they have criminal ties that can help secure votes.
And the fourth challenge is something I think a lot of us feel very deeply when we're in the voting booth. The sense that there's just no meaningful choice. All over the world, the big ideological differences between major parties seem to be shrinking. They kind of agree on all the major economic policies and just argue about the details. This leaves voters who want a genuinely different path with nowhere to go.
These are some pretty serious problems, right? They strike right at the very heart of what democracy is supposed to be about. So that leads us to the biggest question of all. Can these parties actually be fixed? Let's look at some of the ways people are trying.
People have definitely tried. In India, for example, they passed an anti-defection law to stop elected officials from literally switching parties in exchange for cash or a promotion. The Supreme Court there now makes every candidate file a legal document detailing their property and any criminal cases against them, and the Election Commission has even ordered parties to start holding internal elections and file their tax returns.
But a lot of people argue that these steps just haven't gone far enough. And there are some other big ideas that are always being debated. Things like passing a law to force parties to be more democratic internally, or making it mandatory to give a certain number of tickets to women candidates, or even having the government pay for elections to get the influence of big money out of politics. But here's the thing, you can't just pass laws to fix all of this. Real, lasting change probably depends on two other, more powerful forces. First, massive, sustained public pressure from citizens, activists, and the media really holding parties' feet to the fire. And second, having more people who actually want reform to join these parties and try to change them from the inside out. But that brings us to the ultimate catch-22, doesn't it? The final decision to accept any of these reforms is up to the very same party leaders who benefit from the broken system. So that leaves us with a really provocative final thought. If the problem is bad politics, is it possible that the only real solution is, well, more politics and better politics, the kind that's driven not from the top down but from the bottom up, by us? What do you think?